What is entropy? It is the running down of things, I would say. It is like holding in your hand water and it slipping through your fingers. I know it is a concept in chemistry and physics, including cosmology and economics. There's also the phenomenon of moral entropy, when once upon a time you had values, you had standards, you had principles, and you no longer have them because you have been suffering from degeneracy. Is the situation hopeless? No, of course not. There are always solutions to problems, and as time goes on, I find myself more and more inclined to respect the concept of the Abrahamic God, in that it is not only useful, but obviously unfalsifiable. So we have this idea of a singularity, which the universe began, and then it started with a Big Bang, and the actual process of the Big Bang is a very long story of entropy, is it not? I don't know the official scientific theory on it, but surely it must be the whole idea of, well, everything is running down. And this makes me think about what John Maynard Keynes, the economist, said about how in the long run we are all dead. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't kill ourselves now. We have a life. We should hang around to see what happens. And that is basically the idea. We have been given a life, and we have a limited lifespan, and we are to make the most of our opportunity to learn as much as we can about ourselves and our environment. And not only do we try and discover as much as we can, we should do the right thing. And when you talk about doing the right thing, we are, of course, reaching out to the Abrahamic God, who can do anything, knows everything, and is supposed to be perfectly moral. Again, we are asked, what is the point of believing in something that doesn't exist? But that is like saying that there's no purpose in having ideals. You have ideals because you need to be told in which direction you should move towards and what you should aspire to. And even though we know that nobody's perfect and nobody can be perfect, we would at least know which general direction we are heading. That's why we talk about having a moral compass. We want to know whether we're supposed to be going north, south, east or west. We don't ever expect to reach absolute east or absolute west, but it is enough that we know that we're supposed to be going north, and it is only through knowing our destination that we orientate ourselves. We ask questions about where we are. We need to know where we are in order to get where we're supposed to be going. And all this is very useful in solving problems. And so I think we are, I hope, agreed on the idea that the Big Bang began a process of entropy. Of course, we don't know how everything's going to end. Eventually, some astronomers have said that eventually our sun is going to go supernova and engulf the Earth, and then we'll all be dead, or we'll have worked out to whether we're going to be migrating to wherever we need to migrate, which is, well, I think we're kind of looking for a habitable planet that we can migrate to, which is obviously outside our solar system. And I don't even know how these things work. Where's the nearest other solar system? Is it? I think it's Andromeda Galaxy or something. Anyway, I'm very vague about it. So the idea really is that we don't know how things are going to turn out, and we're given a brief time on this earth to wonder about these things and maybe die and never think or do anything ever again, or we will be recycled, reincarnated, and somehow we will be able to imagine the past and imagine the future. Because I think most thoughtful individuals will wonder how our ancestors lived their lives, or what they thought about this or that, and how our descendants, if any, will look upon us as a generation, as a people inhabiting a particular age. Perhaps they will wonder at us and say things like, how could we do X, Y, and Z? How could we be so stupid? In the same way that we might be thinking of the Aztecs sacrificing humans to appease the sun god that would, in any case, have risen the next day. Of such periods of collective madness, we can only imagine the circumstances that might have led to it, the corruption of the priesthood, the helplessness of the monarch. I don't know. But we are certainly supposed to wonder about these things in order to avoid and solve problems, because we have been given the gift of reason. So what has entropy got to do with secular Quranism? I was thinking that if entropy could be equated to the eternal sea, then secular Quranism could be equated with coastal defences. And any kind of analogy, really, that is to do with maintenance or good husbandry. So obviously we need to, well, things need maintaining. I mean, that it's really the idea of maintenance, and maintenance is actually a very boring job, and nobody wants to do that. It's like consolidation. We know what happened to Alexander the Great. He preferred the fun of acquiring empire, conquering territory and peoples, and he never cared about consolidation. And consolidation for empires is a form of maintenance. Because if any of us, I mean, those of us who've played Risk would know that the whole idea of consolidating our territorial gains on the board is that we well, I suppose the old idea was that you need to secure the territory so that your supply lines are maintained in order to keep going your army, which marches on its stomach, i.e. you have to keep your soldiers supplied with food and ammunition, or they will be useless to the object of conquering further territory. And so, matriarchy, I was thinking to myself, is entropy. Of course it is necessary to have to both save and spend. We just need to know, well, both are necessary. There's no point just saving and saving and saving and never spending, because that would not, you wouldn't be actually using the savings for the purpose it was intended. And of course you can't spend and spend and spend and never save, because you will end up poor or enslaved. So for every idea there is its opposite idea, such as, what is the actual opposite of entropy? It must be order or singularity or something of that nature. So yin and yang is also the two sides of the same coin. So the ancient Chinese have basically worked out that the forces of yin and yang will always be with us, and entropy and order will be a cycle, fighting for supremacy in the battlefield of historical materialism. And we are the creatures caught up in the age, who are not really the instigators of these historical, social and cultural processes. We are really flotsam and jetsam on the tide of history and time. And so I think it is necessary for us to understand the cosmic grandeur of being around to think of these things. Now, in the last few days I was talking about the historical process of the West in 3 separate revolutions, confirming its preference of republicanism and the rejection of Christianity. Obviously, this is a new and radical idea that I imagine won't be generally accepted for quite a while. But it's an easy case to make, really, when you think about what the Americans rejected. They rejected the Trinity, and the Trinity is the essence of Christian identity. And even if you wish to undermine this claim of mine by saying, well, not all Christians were Trinitarians, there were the Arians, but even the Arians invested in Jesus some idea of divinity, and therefore it is also idolatry. Both Arianism and Trinitarianism are idolatry, and and therefore forbidden by God if he exists. So what is the purpose, you think, of the Big Bang to start a whole chain of events into being? Well, we are the flotsam and jetsam of the tide of time. I think contemplating these ideas is privilege enough. Perhaps animals occasionally think these thoughts, but I don't see how, if they do not have the language that we do to put all these ideas together to form coherent sentences. And what would be greater still is to be able to understand our place in the world and what we ought to do. What we ought to do for the best. Now, all conversations about morality and politics eventually lead to God. I was reading in some Wikipedia entries on Confucius, and it seems he also believed in God, and there is even such a thing as Confucian theology. And I really don't see how any thinking person, whatever his race or nation, would be able to escape the idea of some kind of cosmic order. We can also see from what we know of history of how certain civilizations are more powerful than others in getting a bit further along the pecking order of human civilizations, and with a bit of study of history we can work out why they failed. We have so many helpful little concepts to help us along with why things are the way they are. And I really do believe I have the answer. The only problem is being able to present it to people who are in a position to do something about it. And it is this regrettable state of entropy that I now find myself in, that I can't find anyone at all to discuss these things with in order to develop the argument and formulate solutions and have them implemented, because the Western political establishment is in a state of entropy, amnesia and dementia. Its wits are scattered. It doesn't know what it's doing. Perhaps it is like a belligerent drunk, drinking in the last chance saloon. Obviously, if World War III is going to break out, we'll just have to suffer. And we already know that imperial collapse has always been preceded by moral collapse. And moral collapse is not obeying the rules that made your tribe or nation or empire or civilization great. And what is the most common of any human tradition? It is, of course, the institution of marriage. And I've explained so many times why marriage is eugenic and bastardy dysgenic, and I don't think anyone's interested, or whoever's interested is not in a position to discuss it because it's taboo. because the matriarchy would regard it as taboo and people are too afraid to discuss what they think they might be cancelled for. But cancel culture has always existed. The best that can be hoped for is that the right people, the right kind of people, are doing the cancelling and the wrong kind of people are being cancelled. Any cursory examination of European history would tell you that things were not always peaceful and fair. Before the Muslims and the Jews arrived, there was a kind of cancel culture to do with being called a traitor. So being called a traitor would be rather worse than being called a racist, a Nazi, a anti-Semite, an Islamophobe. But for the purposes of those times, to be called a traitor was bad enough. It could end you up being in a dungeon or beheaded or exiled. It wasn't very pleasant. So nothing really has changed very much in the way of cancel culture. We just have a new way of expressing these ideas, but the theory is still the same, that the people with the wrong views are cancelled. And that would be fine if they genuinely were the wrong view, but we suspect not. We suspect that sanity, truth, and logic are being cancelled while lies, nonsense, and immorality are being placed on a pedestal in our matriarchy. And matriarchy is all about entropy. This idea of reversion to the mean. So while obviously human society developed to some extent to have a matriarchy, the fact remains is that matriarchy is a primitive kind of society that hadn't discovered marriage, that hadn't discovered these ideas of good husbandry. And of course husbandry comes from the word husband, and husbands are necessary for marriage, and the purpose of marriage is legitimate children. And why are legitimate children better than illegitimate children? It's because it makes humans choose the best possible kind of partner for themselves, who will be long-term and the other parent to their legitimate children, and that is the purpose of sex, really. And as for the idea of sex being a recreational activity, the whole idea of marriage implies that only married people have the right to enjoy recreational sex, and I realise what a transgressive statement this must be for a whole civilization that thinks that recreational sex is the human right of any human being. But really that is really what it's about. That sex and marriage, like taxes and death, is unavoidable if you want to maintain our civilization. For a few generations, the West thought they could get away with not marrying, not having children, and the effect was, in a way, predictable now that you think about it. A senescent society where the average age rises and rises and obviously changes the national character of the nation. And when this happens, it will have consequences for the future of your nation. It is a law of human nature that to be weak, to be stupid, is to invite attack. And therefore to be weak and stupid is to encourage our enemies. And therefore we should avoid being weak and stupid by having a system of rules that would ensure that the best people get to govern the country. And this means that monarchy has to be decisively rejected. It is really the opportunity cost of using a bad system when a good one is already available, that is really the principle of the thing. The principle of the thing must be that we should act for the best possible reasons and do the best that we can, and if that is our rule, then we are going to do better than the other group who doesn't act for the best possible reasons and has no ideals. This much, I think, should be obvious, but sadly I don't think people either know or care or are capable of having a conversation about these things. Obviously, a person who tries to do the best they can for the best possible reasons is going to have a better life than somebody who doesn't even have any minimum standards of behaviour, who don't even have any idea of being on best behaviour, because they would treat everyone the same and would curse and swear and behave in exactly the same way as they would towards somebody of their stature, or if they were to address a king. And so, matriarchy is entropy. Matriarchy is the eternal sea. We are bumping along at the bottom with low standards or no standards of people who don't care and who don't know, who are hopeless and losers and larpers. And this is only because the religion of the West has been failing for centuries. And they thought they could make do with a political ideology called liberalism. But that too has failed because liberalism is not big enough to plug the God-sized hole of failed Christianity. But there is a cure. It's been around for 1400 years. Just imagine that. Unfortunately, the Western psyche is so invested in its own chauvinism, its racism, its ancestral hatreds of a better religion. You would have thought that after 3 revolutions, the American, French and Russian, of rejecting monarchy and Christianity, the penny would drop, and it's obviously an Islamic republic that is beckoning. Obviously a republic would be capable of more meritocracy than a society with a monarch and an aristocracy. Which is not to say that there wouldn't be, the best people in my proposed republic. It's that it doesn't last long anyway, because in Britain the landed gentry has been more or less marginalised. The most wealthy people are not, they're not manufacturers, although once upon a time they were the nouveau riche who took over from the landed gentry when land was the most important thing. So now we have tech giants who are now the fourth estate, who are more powerful than the church, who are a law unto themselves. So what we have here now is the plutocracy fighting itself. And doubtless it will be recruiting the people below to be its foot soldiers. I was talking about opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is something that you could have had if you'd done something else with your time or resources or something of that nature. So opportunity cost could be, well, enormous really when you think of any opportunity you could have had. And it also compounds in a way. So if you, for example, didn't have a very stable childhood, but you're still a bright person, but you didn't pass your exams and therefore you didn't get to a good school, good university, and in the times when graduates earned a lot more money than non-graduates, this would be a significant opportunity cost for somebody who could have made a lot of himself because he was clever, but fell into bad company and took drugs and destroyed his life and ended up homeless, being a homeless wino, sleeping rough. So the opportunity cost of not doing well at school is pretty enormous. And when you think of this sort of thing happening on a nationwide scale, well, it is pretty heartbreaking, really, isn't it? And the fact is, our governments don't care. What is the solution? It must be to talk about these things, but I know most people are so degenerate now that they just wouldn't care. And it's because of the entropy of human connections and the hierarchy in the West that I only have 6 viewers. And mostly mad people in the chat, with a few sane ones, I guess. Stephen, the Quran doesn't say anything about masturbation, and it doesn't say anything about bestiality. In the Torah, it says it's death for both the human and the animal, and it's like, oh, it's not nice for the animal. It was just sort of, I don't know, minding its own business, eating grass in a field, and then this horrible human came up to it, and but according to Jewish law, the animal gets it in the neck. And I've heard one rabbi explain that well, that's because it'd just be too awful to say, oh, look at that cow in the field. It's it's the one that I don't know, Moshe took a fancy to, but he's dead now. But look, do you think it's a pretty cow? What do you think this Moshe might have, fancied about it? And because the rabbis found the whole idea of this cow being still around after its its sex attacker had been punished, that they decided that the animal had to die too, so nobody would point and laugh and at the animal. But there's no mention of that in the Quran. I've spoken to a few Muslims who say, well, it's in the Hadith. The Hadith will punish these beastly, bestial people. And but anyway, I think I'm going to the liberal side and not execute either the human or the animal. I don't know. I mean, they do horrible things to the animal. I think. Anyway, okay, I'll have to have a think about it. But there's no actual punishment or even mention of that in the Quran, so I don't know, maybe I'll just let people have a vote on it. No, I think I'll just let the RSPCA deal with it. Stephen, are you talking about your dream? Did you tell me about your dream? Well, it's a law. It is a law that everything is destined to become more disorderly over time. And gay, I suppose, as you would say, Stephen James. Now, Stephen James, you asked me about masturbation. The Jews have, well, there is actually, I mean, you should hear some rabbis talking about spilling seed. So they're basically saying there's a terrible thing every time you masturbate. Think of all the dead sperm and wasted and blah blah, and so you'd say it's a terrible thing. And I don't know if Kant was aware of. I suppose he must have been. That there is this thing called onanism that I'd heard about, and Kant conceived of the principle of universalizability, and he and he was basically saying, if you want to work out whether something is moral or immoral, just imagine what will happen if everybody did it. So we can imagine a situation. I mean, it's already true that all of us have been at some stage in our lives masturbated, but if you want to take it to its extreme, then you would have to posit a situation in which all we did was masturbate but didn't have sex with each other, and therefore the human race would die out, and we would have to assume that this would be a bad thing, unless you're an environmentalist, I guess. So, and it could happen because you have all these sort of sex dolls and incels and basically people who don't really want, who are not really thinking of marrying or having children or paying for them at all. So I can foresee a situation in which sex dolls will be banned, because if they weren't banned, then, well, men would just have sex with their sex dolls, who wouldn't answer back, who wouldn't give them babies, who wouldn't, cause them any more expense and trouble than, that a human female would cause them. And you can imagine, a whole bunch of men just saying, yeah, that's what we prefer, call us incels if you want, but we're perfectly happy with our sex dolls, and they're very low maintenance. We just wash them every now and then, and it's okay, and it is better than having a woman that talks back to you and nags you and wants you to do stuff and pay for stuff and all that. So the worst case scenario of masturbation would be, this sex doll situation in which, all the men of the world basically said, no, we don't want to have anything to do with real life women who would, rope us into their terrible plans of having babies and paying for them. We want to be incels and just have sex with our sex robots. And also, the thing about masturbation is that the sexually sated male is politically inert. So the whole point of war in the olden days, I mean, just think, I think all countries are basically empires, in a sense that, once upon a time there may have been rival tribes of people, and then they fought each other, and one of them won and did very well, and then they conquered all the other tribes, and the other tribes saw that, they should unite to form a nation. And why am I talking about nations? I can't remember why now. Sorry about that. There was a point I was trying to get to. And it was something about masturbation, and I can't remember now. Talking about sex robots, I don't know if any of you have read the novels of Isaac Asimov, who wrote I, Robot. And I was today reminded of his Foundation series, and it's a pretty mind-boggling stuff. I mean, he's such an excellent writer, and of course he's Jewish, and he created a world, or a galaxy really, or a galactic empire that alludes to the history of the Jewish people, and it's actually fascinating. I really would mind talking to somebody who has read the series. I can barely remember it, but his idea, I mean, there's so many, very big ideas like psychohistory, which is a way of predicting the future, but only if you get a big enough sample of the human race. But anyway, there are many fascinating ideas, and one of the things the universe he created was of the Galactic Empire was that there would be no aliens in his world, and I think it's a Jewish idea that God created the universe just to impress us, and we will probably never find anyone before the universe collapses on itself, and whatever. So that was one of the allegedly Jewish ideas of Asimov, though he was, I think, president of the secular society or something. So all his life he presented himself as a secular Jew, but his critics saw that a lot of his ideas were identifiably Jewish. But particularly that one about there being no aliens in his science fiction world, only humans. Oh yes, I was talking about politically inert men, and I'm saying that a motivator to action in men would be women and booty, and of course women formed part of that booty that I suppose thirsty men would crave, and that would motivate them to join armies in order to conquer new territory. But if most men were encouraged to masturbate or could get sex very cheaply, then they're not going to bust a gut to do what the Vikings did or whatever. And therefore, if most of your men are not sexually frustrated, then they just wouldn't they wouldn't do anything at all. So that's one of the reasons why marriage as a practice was created. Obviously, married men would behave differently to bachelors, because they would be afraid of being cancelled, and so they would be more biddable, more easily controlled, because they had a family to support. But then, and so you give them more, more status, more possession, so they can be kept under control, because it's only when you get to the situation that Marx said of, you have nothing left to lose but your chains, when the situation gets dangerous. So I suppose having sex is a kind of entropy, really. Unless children are produced. And I suppose that's is it a kind of perpetual motion or some analogy to that? yes, I suppose people who don't approve of recreational sex would think you could have had a baby, but you chose not to. But then it's, it's quite a frightening idea to think that, of all the times we've had sex, we could have produced offspring, and we would have had thousands of them, and obviously wouldn't be able to support them, and we would behave like spiders and maybe carry them on our backs for a bit, and when they hatch, we just leave them to fend for themselves. So, to finish, I'll sum up what I thought I said, which is that matriarchy is entropy, and the eternal sea, while patriarchy is coastal defences and a move towards singularity and accountability and leadership, which obviously you all lack. And that's why you cannot organise yourselves into doing anything. You can't even organise a piss up in a brewery. So in theory the problem can be solved in the sense that you can talk to somebody and say, well, this is what you have to do. You could in theory do it, but they don't want to, or they just want to I don't know, die on their deathbed, even though they could shift themselves if they weren't feeling so depressed. And I think that the problem is out of shame. If you all had families to support, then you'd have your nagging wife, and even nagging wives have their purpose, in that it will bestir the man to do what he feels he has to do. Most men are not brave. Most men do have a certain sense of what is appropriate, so men would reluctantly protect their women and children from attack, even though they know they're going to get hurt. So they would be more likely to defend their country against a foreign invasion if they felt they had some stake in society. But if they don't own anything, then the instinct would be to run away. Colin, thank you for commenting on my way of stretching metaphors. I don't know if you've noticed Jen talking about how much she hates metaphors. Perhaps she was referring to me. So the opposite of entropy is patriarchy. The opposite of entropy is secular Quranism. And I think I'm still number one, really, aren't I? I mean, nobody else has any idea about how to, I don't know, make America great again, or whatever, words to that effect. And the only way you can make your country great again is to go back to what it was that made it great, and it wasn't matriarchy. I mean, if you were all like this, then, you would never have done anything. You would have stayed wherever you are. You wouldn't have crossed continents and oceans to get anywhere. And people just wouldn't, think of all these ingenious ways to people their colonies, such as well, basically rounding up the proles in England and charging them with a trumped up charge and then transporting them to Australia and making it a penal colony and Australia not even properly labelling their political parties. So you have this sort of crazy anomaly where the Liberal Party in Australia is really the Conservative Party. And it's like, yeah, you just haven't even changed your name, because you don't care. I guess it's a bit like the Chinese, it's like, well, there's only one party in China, so they're going to call it the Chinese Communist Party, whether or not it practices communism. And anyway, they've basically thrown out the idea of communism, haven't they? They basically said it's dialectical materialism that we believe in, and then things will keep, changing, and we're going to ride on these waves, in a way that is, well, more competent than how Westerners are doing. But it seems to me all the solutions are so obvious, and I really despair that so few people can see this, or perhaps they just don't want to. Obviously the solution is a one-party theocracy governed by the principles of secular Quranism. Trying to build a competitor channel to the multi-right Cristobal Ralph show. I know he was about to stream, and the thing is, he doesn't even keep his streams up, so what's the point? And the thing is, he doesn't really have any new ideas, and it's really more a hug box of crazy Christians and Islamophobes and people he's obviously too embarrassed to leave out because they say these crazy things. So thank you, Stephen, for your idea of Qurani Yule. I mean, Qurani Yule will just be people who want to be interviewed by me. Obviously, I'll be looking around for people to interview. Yes, Hat-Trick Suit says, for everything there is a season. After the building up during patriarchy season, there is decay and collapse during matriarchy season, then darkness and eventually patriarchy and building again. Thank you for mentioning that. This is obviously from the Old Testament in Ecclesiastes, I think, and Asimov in his Foundation series was talking about, okay, the story is basically this. The Galactic Empire is about to collapse, and Harry Seldon is this genius who invented psychohistory, and he's saying, it will be terrible, and, because it'll be 30 centuries of collapse and chaos, I think. And then he said, but we have this idea, and it will only reduce the chaos to about 1,000 years. So that's basically the premise of Isaac Asimov's Foundation, and this is also the premise of secular Quranism. That I'm expecting a collapse. I am expecting things to be a little nasty, and I'm saying here's a solution, and and if you can remember it, and if you know what it is, and once you get used to the idea, you'll be able to reach out for it in extremis, and even open its pages and read it, and even act on its suggestions. And what I'm doing is really preparing the ground for you to think in this constructive way. Luke seems to have gone quiet, Colin. I'm not selling myself to anybody. And that's why I've been so reassuringly consistent, because I am consistent, aren't I? I mean, people complain all the time that I say the same thing again and again. But I think I need to until, really you finally get it that I mean what I say. And also, the ideal scenario would be this, that suddenly there's a market for secular Quranism, and I need lots of secular Quranists to go and advise people and explain the idea to them, and you guys who, kind of absorbed my ideas and can repeat, the tenets of secular Quranism in your sleep, then you guys can just sort of go out and propagate it for me, because there are a few of you who think, you can do a better job. People like Conops who thinks he can sell it better than me. So this is what I hope for ideally. It is a holistic solution, and it is the obvious answer to your problems, and perhaps soon you will see that it is the only way forward. Thank you for listening.